Welcome to today's Community Cast. My name is Matt Morgan. I'm the pastor at Community Brookside, a new church plant in Tulsa, Oklahoma. We are so blessed by your presence, and we hope that today's content will bring you joy. So a couple of weeks ago, we started a new sermon series called From a Different Perspective, and we have talked about some great stories, the story of Zacchaeus, the story of Jesus and Peter walking on water. And today we're going to take another look at a story of Scripture that I'm sure we've all heard, at least in part, before. This is a story that comes to us from every single one of the Gospels. All four of them talk about Jesus feeding the multitude. Some versions are a little bit different. Some it's 4,000, some it's 5,000. But regardless, we're talking today about Jesus feeding people miraculously. I'm going to read to you from the book of John, chapter 6. If you have your Bibles, I invite you to pull open your Bibles, make notes, underline. It's always wonderful to write in the margins of your Scripture, but if you don't have it, it'll be on the screen as well. And this comes to us from the book of John, chapter 6, verses 1 through 15. Hear now the word of God. Sometime after this, Jesus crossed to the far shore of the Sea of Galilee, that is, the Sea of Tiberias. And a great crowd of people followed him because they saw the signs he had performed by healing the sick. Then Jesus went up on a mountainside and sat down with his disciples. The Jewish Passover festival was near. When Jesus looked up and he saw a great crowd coming toward him, he said to Philip, "Where shall we buy food for these people to eat?" He asked this only to test him, for he already had in mind what he was going to do. Philip answered him, "It would take more than half a year's wages to buy enough bread for each one to have a bite." Another of his disciples, Andrew, Simon Peter's brother, spoke up. "Here is a boy with 5 small barley loaves and 2 small fish. But how far will they go among so many?" Jesus said, "Have the people sit down." There was plenty of grass in that place, and they sat down. About 5,000 men were there. Jesus then took the loaves, gave thanks, and distributed to those who were seated as much as they wanted. He did the same with the fish. When they had all had enough to eat, he said to his disciples, "Gather up the pieces that are left over. Let nothing be wasted." So they gathered them and filled 12 baskets with the pieces of the of the 5 barley loaves left over by those who had eaten. After the people saw the sign Jesus performed, they began to say, "Surely this is the prophet who is to come into the world." Jesus, knowing they intended to come and make him king by force, withdrew again to a mountain by himself. So friends, this morning we're going to go back in time. For some of you, it was a few years ago when you were children, right? For others of you, it was more than a few years ago that you were children. But I want you to go back in your mind to your hometown. Go back to a time when you were about 9 or 10 years old. Can you remember that time in your life? Some of you are 9 or 10 now, or 11, it's fine. Yeah, there you go. But I want you guys to go back to your hometown, back into that time. Do you remember what life was like when you were about 10 years old? Do you remember when all your joints used to work? Do you remember when you didn't get hurt every time you just sneezed, right? Go back to that time in your life when you lived at home with your family, when you played outside and you were able to run and frolic. Now, I know that not everyone's childhood was the same. And I know that some of you grow up in broken homes, or maybe without one parent or the other. However, for the sake of today's story, I want you guys to suspend your disbelief, and I want you to fall into the story that I'm about to tell. So let's get started. It is going to be a long day. You woke up this morning before the sun was up because you and your father are going to be spending the rest of your day among sheep. Your father is a hired hand and a shepherd for a local farmer. And today, he's training you to become the same. Usually, it's the responsibility of the youngest son in the family to help with the sheep, but today, he's training you. And on this first day, he's teaching you about the tools of the trade. And he's helping to show you how to guide the sheep where you want them to go. It's not an easy task, especially with the number of sheep that are under your watch. Your father has promised that he will also spend the day today teaching you to use the staff that he carved for you in order to help you in your shepherd's work. Your staff is a long, smooth stick about 4 feet long with kind of a crook at the top. And your father has one too, but his is a little bit taller than yours. These staffs are sometimes used to bump the hind end of sheep in order to carefully guide them and to keep them from danger. Your father has also told you about how the shepherd's staff can be used to ward off dangerous animals like the Syrian brown bear or the desert wolves or even the Asiatic cheetahs that are sometimes around your area. Your staff may be smaller than your father's, but they both have the same markings on them all the way up the staff, which you were told are there to help measure the growth of the sheep. The crook on the end of your staff can help you lift up fallen animals that are in your care. You can lift them up out of the craggy outcroppings of the rocks or the pits or areas that they might get stuck in. Your father showed you how to best wrap the hook around the horn of your sheep or around the sheep's bellies or legs in order to lift them out of trouble. But you know that you are, at this age and this size, too small to lift out any but the smallest of sheep in your flock. You are also equipped with what your father calls a rod. This rod is a small, straight stick, almost shaped like a club. It's about this big. But there are little metal nails hammered into the end and sharpened to a point. He tells you that this rod is for protection against anyone that would come to take your sheep away. He said it could also be used to kill snakes or fend off other prey animals if they try attacking your sheep. For now, you keep this rod inside what your father told you is called a scrip. The scrip is a little leather bag that hangs around your shoulder. It's made of dried animal skin that is slung over your shoulder, and it's just a big pouch, really, almost like a satchel. When your father gave it to you, he told you that King David used to have one just like yours. He used his scrip to hold the 5 smooth stones, which he chose out of the riverbed when he faced the giant Goliath. King David drew the stone that he used to kill the giant Goliath from his scrip, and it looked just like yours. You've never been so proud in all your life. You have some of the same tools that God's anointed king would have used when he was your age and when he was shepherding, just like you're training to become. Your father tells you that your mother has made you some lunch, and he hands you a small waxed cloth, which, as you unwrap it, you see holds a couple of pieces of bread, some small cheese curds, a few dried figs, and about a dozen olives. This looks delicious. He tells you to put your lunch inside your scrip. So you shift your rod over to the side, and you put your lunch in your little scrip in your pouch, and it's on your hip where you know it's going to be safe all day until the time comes for you to eat your lunch. The sun is out today. The weather's pleasant. You can smell the crisp water of the lake nearby. It's not too far away from where your sheep are grazing. You really like your job so far. You're young, but being outside in the perfect weather makes this job something you think you're going to look forward to as you get older. For the rest of the morning, you and your father guide the sheep from place to place as he shows you how to use your tools. He also shows you the best places to graze your sheep, and he shows you where they can get water. Each place is only a short journey from one to the other, but trying to guide sheep makes the journey a little more difficult. There are occasionally little sheep stragglers that stop to chew on a wildflower plant here or there or chase little grasshoppers away from the main part of your flock. Your father has made it your job to round up those stragglers and to get them back in line with the rest of your flock. And you love this task. It's an opportunity for you not just to only hone your newfound skills, but it also gives you a chance to prove to your father that you can do what he's asked you to do. One after another, from place to place, you help your father guide the herd as you corral the stragglers back together with the rest of the flock. As the sun gets higher in the sky, the air becomes a little bit warmer. It's a dry warmth, not quite like sweat-inducing, but it's warm. It's not a hot and humid air like the air you've heard about in other parts of the world, like a mythical place called Oklahoma. But it's just right for you to guide your flock of sheep. In the heat of the day, your father sits you beneath a large olive tree, and you realize that your eyes are getting heavy. So you close them, but just for a little while. And when you open your eyes again, the sun is in a very different position in the sky, and you realize that the end of your day is almost here. Apparently, you didn't just rest your eyes, but instead fell asleep on the job. but now you feel refreshed and restored. Like you really don't even want to go home. You could do this all day, even though your shift is ending. As you grab your things and you start out to find your father, you realize that it's about time for the afternoon shepherds to come and relieve you of your shift. This second shift of shepherds are the younger men without families, and they're going to stay there with the sheep all the way overnight until early in the morning. You and your father will go home where you know your mother has prepared food for you. But where is your dad? As you gather your wits, you see him walking your way from over a small ridge nearby. As he approaches, he grabs your hand, and the two of you walk towards your home, which is about 2 miles from here. Just inside the city gates. It's been a great day for you. One of the best days of your life. All the way home, you can't stop talking to your dad, asking him questions, telling him how amazing it was today. You can barely wait for your father to answer your previous question before you ask the next one. You have been so excited to spend the day with your father. And as you walk home and you're nearing the edge of the city, you see a crowd. And you ask your father, what's happening? I'm not sure, he says, but I bet it's another one of those zealots trying to garner support for another rebellion against the Romans. I bet he will fail like all the others. You know all too well about the Romans. You understand their abuse of your people. You know about the crucifixions, about the racism, the indentured servitude that these foreign occupiers keep your people in. You've heard about how the people in your village sometimes have disappeared after speaking out against the Romans. Some of the people who have gone missing are your family members and your relatives. You think they're being held in a prison somewhere, but you're not for sure. And you know your parents don't tell you everything about these situations because they still feel like you're too young. Now, you disagree. You think you're ready to handle the information. But there are some things they don't think you're ready for yet. As you and your father walk towards home, he continues to talk about how this crowd should disperse so it doesn't draw the attention of the Roman delegates in the area. And suddenly you hear your mother's voice. There you are. I expected you home hours ago. Did you not remember that today is the day that Jesus of Nazareth was coming nearby? Did you see him? He has been out here all day, just over there on the other side of the mountain, all day long teaching. So that was Jesus? Your father asks. Of course it was. Did you see the huge crowd around him? Almost every single person from our village has come out to hear him. Some people are coming back, running through the streets, shouting out about how he has been healing people and telling them about the coming kingdom of God. We need to get over there and fast. Here, I've packed you both some dinner. Let's go and see what Jesus is doing. I am so excited, she says. Your mother has handed you both your dinners. She's wrapped up 5 small loaves of bread and 2 smoked fish that your father caught the day before while fishing in the Sea of Galilee. You know your father will eat those 3 loaves of bread, and the other 2 leftovers will be for you. Your father then hands you his dinner, and he says, here, put this in your scrip, and we'll eat it when we arrive where Jesus is teaching. You place the food in your little leather pouch, and the 3 of you hurry over to the hill, to the edge of your town, where you see Jesus sitting about halfway up the mountain. As you approach, you look around, and at all those that you see nearby, some are sitting, some are standing, some are even laying on mats who you can tell are sick or lame. And as you take a seat and you sit and listen for a while, you hear Jesus say some things that you've never heard before. He says things like, love those who hate you. And he says, no matter how many times someone has sinned against you, you must forgive them. God has forgiven you, so you have to do the same thing. He doesn't sound like a rebellion leader that your father talked about. He sounds so different from any other leader that you've ever heard before because this man, Jesus, he isn't really talking about rebellion at all. He doesn't sound angry or hostile, but instead his voice is calm and peaceful. When you hear him speak, it brings you a sense of hope. Just then, your stomach rumbles and you realize it's getting late in the day and the sun will soon be setting. As you open your script to take out the food your mother has prepared for you and your father, a man comes nearby and asks how much food you have with you. You recognize him as one of the men who were accompanying Jesus on the mountain earlier. As he gets closer to you, you offer him one of the loaves you have, and he simply smiles and shakes his head. He then invites you to stand up and to follow him as he turns and begins to make his way back towards Jesus. You look over at your mother and your father, and they both smile and nod as if giving you permission to follow. You're about to take your scrip off to leave it here with the rest of your food for your mom and dad, but the man turns around and he stops you. He said, "The Lord needs what you have. If you're willing to share it with Jesus, then please bring it with you." You put your scrip back on, and both of your parents wave at you as this man begins to take you close to where Jesus is. You get so close to where Jesus is, you can see Jesus clearly from this new location. You can see the small lines on his face, around his eyes and around his mouth. Clearly, he spends so much time laughing and smiling. His dark skin reminds you of your father, who spends much of his day working out in the sun. Jesus looks at you and he invites you close to him. "What do you have there, little one? Can I see?" You open your little bag and you lift out the cloth that holds yours and your father's dinners. "Oh, wow," Jesus says. "Those loaves look amazing and they smell so good. I bet your mother is an incredible cook. Did your father catch those fish? They look absolutely perfect." You are speechless, and your eyes are glued to Jesus' smile. And he continues, "Do you see all these people, little one?" You nod, but you never take your eyes off of Jesus. They have all been here all day long, and they're very hungry. Would you be willing to share what you have with them? Now, I know that you're hungry too, but I want to do something very special today for you and for the people of your hometown. Again, you nod, never taking your eyes off Jesus' face. And as you take off your scrip, Jesus gently takes from you the loaves of bread, and he thanks you for your gift, and he smiles so big that all of his teeth are showing. And you can't help but smile in return. Just then, Jesus takes out of the scrip 4 of the loaves, and he begins to hand them with the few fish over to his disciples that are nearby. But he keeps one of those loaves for himself. And you stand there in amazement. With the disciples still nearby, Jesus lifts the first loaf over his head, and he calls all of those who are near to listen to him and to pay attention. With the bread hoisted high over his head, with a loud voice, Jesus starts to pray. His eyes are closed so tightly as he thanks God, not just for the bread and for the fish, but Jesus also thanks God for you and your willingness to share what you have with him. And you're stunned. As Jesus finishes his prayer, he begins to break the bread apart. First in half, then in quarters, then into smaller and smaller pieces. He begins to give those pieces to disciples with instructions to distribute them to all who are hungry. Moments later, he begins to tear the smoked fish into smaller and smaller pieces, and he hands those to his disciples with the same commands. Jesus, now empty-handed, watches as the disciples move from group to group, from family to family, person to person, handing out as many pieces of bread and fish to anyone who would want. You notice that as the disciples hand out the food to the thousands of people around you, the amount that they have never changes at all. What is happening, you ask yourself? Just then, one of the disciples comes near to you and offers you some of your own bread. You are starving after such a long day, so you excitedly accept his offer. It looks like a full meal. The disciple places so much bread into your hands, you wonder if you're ever going to be able to eat it all. And following just a few steps behind is another one of Jesus' friends who's holding fish. "Would you like some fish?" he asks politely. "Yes, please," you respond. As he places so much fish into your hands, you almost drop all of your bread. How can this be happening? You wonder in amazed silence as you pick up a piece of bread and examine it in your hand. It looks no different than any piece of bread you've ever held in your hand, but this same loaf from which the pieces have been torn is now miraculously feeding what looks like 1 million people out here on the side of the mountain. In wonder and amazement, you eat and eat until your little belly is full of some of the best fish and bread you've ever had. As you wipe your mouth on the sleeve of your robe, you notice that each of Jesus' disciples are carrying around baskets and they're filling them with bread and fish all the way to the brim with pieces of leftover fish and bread. You overhear one of the disciples say that they plan to go over near the city gate where at this point they're going to give the rest of this food to those who are still there, who are still needing healing. Those who haven't had a chance to be a part of what Jesus was doing will now be included too. In this moment, you sit and you listen to the conversations that are happening all around you. You hear the crowd say things like, surely this man is going to deliver us from the Romans. He has to be the Messiah, they say. We should anoint this man king over all of Israel. This is a miracle. Everybody around you is talking. And as you think to yourself that you are glad that you were able to play a part and be a part of this miracle, you wonder to yourself if Jesus really could be the man that your people have been looking for over 700 years. As you turn your gaze back toward Jesus and where he was standing earlier, you notice that Jesus is no longer there. The disciples are walking toward the city, but Jesus is gone, vanished. You make your way back to your parents and you can see that they are so proud of you. They ask you what Jesus was like, and you can't stop talking about the miracle that you were part of until you make it all the way back home to your front door. You are exhausted. It's been a long day today, but one of the best of your life. You kiss your parents goodnight, and you quickly fall asleep, wondering about this mysterious Jesus that you just met. Could you imagine playing a role in one of the miracles that Jesus performed? I want you to think about that for a second. Playing a role in a miraculous event that was performed by Jesus, the Son of God. Could you imagine? In this story, a young boy offered food to be used by the Lord, and something incredible was done, right? Jesus was in need, and the child offered what he had. One of the greatest parts of this miracle was that the little boy was willing to offer just his resources. That's it. When Jesus and the disciples needed food for the crowd, the little boy was willing and he gave it all, right? It didn't say he kept back a little loaf for himself. He gave everything he had to Jesus. He could have been stingy. And I will tell you that when it comes to food, my wife will remind you that I, in fact, very stingy, right? When it comes to food, I don't share. And he could have done the same thing, but he chooses not to in that moment. And he would have been okay to say no, right? I don't know Jesus. I don't know these people. I'm just going to keep my own food. But instead, he says yes. In that moment, even if he would have said no, he would have been no different than anybody else in the crowd. He could have kept what was his, and he just would have been another person sitting on the side of the mountain listening to Jesus. But instead, when asked, he just simply says yes. If he said no, the miracle might not have been performed, and the crowd would have gone hungry. Now, I want you to think about it. Was the offering, what he brought, was it enough for the crowd? Huh? You can speak. What? No, it wasn't enough, right? Was what the little boy had enough to feed 5,000 people? Not a chance. It was enough for him and his father. That is a miraculous part of the story that we just heard. That even though the offering was not enough for the crowd, it was exactly what Jesus needed. Now, to be clear, Jesus didn't have to perform this miracle, did he? He could have just said, all right, guys, I'm done teaching now. Go and find some food on your way home. But he didn't. In that moment where he knew people were hungry, he provided. And he provided in abundance, didn't he? Just like Jesus has a tendency to do here in this moment, Jesus gives abundantly. He didn't want the people to leave hungry. Jesus wanted to provide for them. And to be super abundantly clear, I don't think that Jesus needed the 5 loaves and the 2 fish, right? Because God, as we know, has a tendency to provide for people, especially when it comes to food, right? I want you to hearken your minds back to Israel as they were leaving Egypt. God could have called steak out of the air and fries to grow up out of the ground. But he didn't. He used the gifts that were there to provide for all. Jesus chose to include a little boy in offering this miracle. And we have to ask ourselves, why? Friends, I think that in this moment, Jesus wants to remind all of us that we have to be the people we are. We have what we have in order to give. When Jeff preached a couple weeks ago at the end of August, he talked about the different gifts that many of you in this place have. He mentioned Kim and Kyle and Erica and Debbie and Rich and Joshua by name. And he pointed out that every one of them, along with so many of the rest of you, are using your gifts to make this community, this church, work. It's because each of us come here offering our gifts to God that God is going to do something amazing in this church. I absolutely believe that with my whole heart. We can't be selfish with our gifts. When we come here in this place, we use our gifts selflessly. We don't want to play piano or sing or lead a Sunday school class or volunteer with a youth program because it benefits us. But just like in the story of Jesus feeding the multitude, this little child's gift impacts the lives of everybody that are around. If you notice, it wasn't until the people had been fed that they decided that Jesus was going to be their king. So think about this. They heard Jesus preaching and teaching, and they saw him performing miracles of healing all day long. And then when Jesus invites them to sit and eat, then they say, oh, he's got to be the king. It's in that moment they decide not only is he benefiting their physical lives, but he's also making sure that they are abundantly fed. This is the guy that we want to be the king over us. A king that will provide for us and not abuse us. A king that will love us and lift us up, rather than use us simply for tax dollars and cannon fodder. Sometimes offering what we have helps others to see what God is really doing right around us. It was after that little boy offered all he had that they finally experienced what Jesus was bringing. And in this moment, this little boy expressed a childlike faith for all of us to remember. Even though it was late in the afternoon and he himself had a long day, he wasn't selfish with his gifts. He trusted that Jesus could do something special in that moment and with the offering he brought. And when he gave, everyone was rewarded. This little boy is going to be remembered for the entirety of history because he was willing to give to Jesus what Jesus needed in order to bless the community around him. His faith in what Jesus could do with the 5 loaves and 2 fish was all that was necessary for Jesus to bless the thousands of people who were there to learn from him. I've said it before and I'm going to say it a million more times. We are blessed with our gifts, our talents, our intellect, our wisdom, our faith, and all the other spiritual gifts that we have in order for us to be a blessing to everyone around us. We cannot be selfish with what we have. We are blessed to be a blessing. You've heard that, and it's truth. And here within this story, a small child sets for us an example, and for the whole world, what a blessing and being a blessing actually looks like. So friends, this day and always, may each of us remember this story. May we remember that it's not about bread and fish, but instead, let us think of how this story is a reminder that we are to use what God has given us to make the world around us a better, safer, more loving place like God demands. May we use our gifts to bless others in our lives so that they can see Jesus at work in and through us. May we all love others so much that we're willing to act selflessly to help those around us every chance that we have. And friends, may we each trust in Jesus. May we trust him with our resources, our gifts, our money, our abilities, and our very lives, so that we may help to multiply his purpose for the world through our offerings. May it be so today and forever. Thank you so much for joining us on today's Community Cast. We hope that you were blessed by today's conversation. If you'd like to know more about Community Brookside, please feel free to visit us at our website, communitybrookside.com, or find us on your favorite social media outlet. We hope to hear from you soon. Be blessed.